Okay, this is video number 2, chapter 16, reading from The Rape of the Mind by Mind.wmv. But he was not the only walking fact collection I have met. Another one of my patients was a young man who was obsessed with the desire to accumulate all the learned degrees his university could deliver. At the time I met him, he was a member of a Nazi organization. Here is an example of the fact that many a pedant has an affinity with an authoritarian political system. Even in this group, he provoked hostility because his search for facts and more facts, facts only for the sake of facts, his compulsions became too much for even his totalitarian fellows. He had delusions of grandeur and had absolutely no emotional relationships at all. Both signs that a psychotic process was going on. But his intellectual capacity was intact. The son of a scholar, he had lived in constant competition with his father early in youth. He started to read the encyclopedia, and later in grade school and high school he was cheered because of his phenomenal knowledge. Indeed, he did know the facts, but he knew nothing else. He knew neither how to get along with himself nor with anyone else. These two cases serve to demonstrate how a mechanized educational system failing to detect even an urgent need for emotional relationships and a sense of belonging and placing its emphasis on learning instead of living can produce adults who are totally unequipped to meet the problems of life, who are themselves only half alive and completely incapable of meeting the challenges of reality. Such men and women do not make good democratic citizens. One of the most essential tasks of education for mental freedom is to prepare the child for mature adulthood by teaching him to see the essentials and by teaching him to think for himself. There are several fields of interest through which the capacity to think for oneself may be developed. For instance, the field of communication and the science of abstraction. A child's awareness of his own language, of the words he himself uses as an expressive tool rather than as a set of grammatical rules, can lead him to inquisitiveness about other languages and other ways of thinking, and thus may lead him to the ability to think abstractly and to understand relationships. The child's period of greatest sensitivity to foreign languages is when he is about 10, much younger than the age at which we normally teach foreign languages. At this age, too, the child begins to have an active personal interest in words and self-expression. This interest can be used to make language an exciting, adventurous exploration instead of a cut-and-dried process of memorization. Our schools must stimulate inventiveness and self-activity too, through such subjects as carpentry and designing. Creative play with concrete objects also develops the child's capacity to abstract and to generalize, making it easier for him to absorb the abstractions which underlie all mathematics. If, instead of throwing the child into the sea of abstractions he finds in the daily arithmetic drill, we brought him to an understanding of the process of abstraction by carefully graded steps, he would absorb and assimilate what he learned, not merely parrot what he was told. We tend, for instance, to teach mathematical abstractions at too early an age, just as we wait too long to teach language and verbal expression. History is a subject which is not learned by memorizing facts and dates, but through mutual discussion. It has to start with the concept of personal lifetimes and personal history. It is better to give a child a printed report of the history of yesterday and ask for his comments and opinions on it, or better to promote individual thought by letting him search for background information in a library or a museum than to ask him to memorize facts. In this way, the learning of history can become an adventure. We can also revise the system that risks so easily rearing mediocre people who fit into a pattern of mediocrity. Different children must be trained and educated differently. Each one has his own internal timetable. Each one will have his own life adjustments. Why should we compulsively do to our children what we would never do to the flowers in our gardens? Every plant is allowed to attain its own natural size. Our current scholastic practice stimulates ambition in a few children but stifles it in others. Instead of promoting cheating by our rigid examination rules, why do we not allow children to help one another in the solution of common problems? Very often children can teach each other what the teacher cannot. Think for a moment of the child especially sensitive to the boredom of some of our contemporary schools. He becomes either a conformist, full of good marks and no original thoughts, or rebel, ripe for the child guidance clinic of today and possibly for the totalitarian state of tomorrow. Well, if we had a good educational system, we might have people who grow up to think, and if we have a bunch of thinkers, oh, that might be dangerous. Who the hell would work in the McDonald's, right? Discipline and morale. While good morale implies inner strength and self-discipline, it may not necessarily imply a set group discipline in a political or military sense. Good personal morale and backbone were two of the needed qualifications for taking part successfully in the underground during the last war. The partisans, working secretly, now here, now there, relied in their lonely combat on their individual initiative and morale as much as, if not more than, on distant leadership and discipline. This is just the opposite of a kind of standby morale impelled by blind fear and maintained from a distance, the kind which is obtained in jails or concentration camps, or in a tribe with extreme emphasis on common participation. In the first groups there was morale without discipline, in the second, discipline without morale. In the same way, there are some officers who can only develop discipline without morale. Nevertheless, there is usually an inner relation between discipline and morale. Only when a certain amount of initial disciplinary training is given to youngsters or soldiers are they well conditioned for that personal inner strength, which is based on self-confidence and trust in the group as a whole, together with confidence in the authorities. Emergency discipline is resorted to during times of stress, when there is usually lack of time with the rest, that there is not a sufficient period for self-control and adjustment to the group. Only a self-chosen discipline which develops gradually can lay the basis for inner freedom and morale. This rule has been forgotten by many educators. Only this basis of initial conditioned patterns gives us the confidence to stand on our own. We all start by introjecting and taking over our morale from others, our parents and educators. The basis of our personal morale is what we internalize from them. The subtle mutual relation between discipline and freedom starts in the cradle under the care of loving and interested and consistent parents. The parents are the first to build morale. The conflict between discipline and morale in a group usually arises when the members are held together by compulsion or necessity. Here the inner coherence will be completely different from that of a situation in which there is a spontaneous loyalty to the group. The aim of all discipline is to develop a better adjustment to the group. In turn, success in identifying with the group develops a stronger ego. From this point on, freedom begins. A further understanding of these morale-building principles is important for an evaluation of the inner strength or vulnerability of the various cultural groups. We may expect, according to our experiences in psychotherapy, that where too much discipline or even slavery prevails, the inner cohesion of the group will be very different from that of a group expecting and holding the individual in high esteem. Yet we have found men, even in the armies of totalitarian systems, who exemplify high morale. I call to mind those Japanese soldiers who, without any tie with the mother country, stuck to their lonely posts for years after the war, as though the emperor and his generals were still looking at them. This tells us something about the consistent love, security, and dedication they received in the first 6 years of life. And that's where I'll stop. We're in chapter 16. This was part 2. And I will see you in the next video. I think it'll only take maybe 2 videos more. See you there.